Prepare to have your health questions answered here on Safe, Effective Natural Solutions with Dr. Todd Binkley, owner of Binkley Healing Center in downtown Ventura. Now, here's Dr. Todd.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Todd Binkley, board-certified doctor of non-force chiropractic and practitioner of functional medicine. Today, I really am. Last week, I said I was going to do it. We ran out of time. Today, we are going to talk about the gut microbiome and the connection between the gut microbiome and hormones. So did you know that estrogen interacts with the gut microbiome? One of the most significant interactions occurs through estrogen metabolism. There are a group of gut bacteria, among them E. coli, Enterobacteriaceae, Bacteroidetes, Firmicutes, Proteobacteria, and Actinobacteria. So you can be forgiven if you've never heard of those before. They're all included in a comprehensive stool test to test the levels of various beneficial and pathogenic bacteria in the gut. And these particular species of bacteria modulate estrogen levels by producing beta-glucuronidase, which is an enzyme that influences estrogen reabsorption. So if you have inadequate amounts of those particular subset of gut bacteria, then that's going to interfere with make it more difficult to maintain normal estrogen levels. So an imbalance of these microorganisms can lead to excessive or insufficient circulation, too much or too little. And this contributes to symptoms such as PMS, fibroids, endometriosis, and menopausal symptoms. Improper estrogen metabolism can also lead to an accumulation of harmful estrogen metabolites. So this means, you produce estrogen, and then your body, once you're finished with it, it circulates throughout your system for a certain period of time and then is broken down into metabolites. And increase or accumulation of excessive estrogen metabolites increases the risk of estrogen-dominant conditions, including breast cancer and ovarian cancer. So optimizing gut health is crucial for maintaining balanced estrogen levels. And it also goes the other way. Estrogen influences the composition of the gut microbiome diversity, and it significantly impacts the gastrointestinal system as a whole. Fluctuations in estrogen levels affect overall gut health, particularly during menstruation and menopause. So too much estrogen can reduce gut motility, the muscular control of moving the stomach through. It's like a conveyor belt moving food through your stomach. It can reduce that speed at which food travels through your intestines, leading to constipation, while low estrogen can cause increased motility or diarrhea. Estrogen also supports the intestinal lining by promoting mucus production and maintaining tight junctions between epithelial cells. If you've ever heard of leaky gut, leaky gut occurs when these tight junctions in the cells of your small intestine become no longer tight, and foreign bacteria, foreign protein fragments, other debris and toxins can get from your intestines into your bloodstream where they do not belong and create inflammation. So if you're having issues with digestion and you've tried a number of things but never had your hormones checked, then you may need to get your hormones checked, which of course I'm happy to do for you. And it isn't always, I need to say, I've talked about this several times before, for things like this, it usually is better to get a saliva hormone test, not a blood test. So blood tests are the gold standard for most things in the body, but sometimes we need to do a stool test. Sometimes for heavy metals, I might do a hair test. There's lots of different body fluids. There's some tests that are best done on urine, etc. And for hormone issues that don't involve pregnancy, so for menopause and female hormones, it's better to test saliva, because normally the solution you're going to do if you end up low in estrogen or progesterone, you're most likely going to do some kind of topical bioidentical hormone replacement. And usually I find that you can use much lower doses. People that are only getting tested with blood tests from standard endocrinologists are often getting way over, or if they're being tested at all. This is the other thing. I have women that come in all the time. They're taking standard medical hormone replacement therapy, way too much of it, and they're not even getting tested. They're just saying, here, take this amount and see how you feel. Well, that's crazy. You need to get it dosed right. It needs to be very tightly controlled, and too much is never better. And many, many times I've seen women that they're already on hormone replacement therapy and they're not getting the results. And guess what? The symptoms of too much estrogen are often the same as too little estrogen, because your body just becomes insensitive to it, and it leads to a point of diminishing returns. So the equipment used for saliva testing is 10 times more sensitive to identify the normal levels of estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, testosterone, etc. in the saliva. There's much less in the saliva. They're lower concentrations, so it requires very sensitive equipment to measure that. But you're also getting an average of these hormones throughout the day. So your blood levels of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, these things are going up and down every 10 minutes, up and down like a roller coaster. If you saw it on a graph, it's just spiking up, spiking down, spiking up, spiking down. And, that is important for some things. But for managing a chronic hormone imbalance, a deficiency or an excess, it's better to get an average throughout the day. So when you do a saliva hormone test, you're spitting in 4 tubes so we can measure your cortisol levels at 4 different times throughout the day. And then they make a 5th tube by combining a little bit from each of those 4. And that way you get that average of your levels throughout the day. And you usually need, if anything, you usually need much lower levels of bioidentical plant-based hormones. And if you're having symptoms in your gut, constipation, diarrhea, nausea, bloating, gas, and you've done everything else you can think of to directly address those conditions, and you're not getting the results you want, then it may be a hormonal issue. And we need to check your hormones to figure out that last piece of it. So, of course, everything affects everything else. If you're having difficulty with your hormones and you've been taking bioidentical hormones and testing and getting some improvements, but not the improvements you've hoped for, then we may need to do a stool test to check the gut microbiome, because problems with the gut microbiome and insufficient amounts of certain bacteria that are essential for producing and metabolizing and maintaining adequate, ideal, balanced estrogen and progesterone. You have to have that function in the gut. You have to have those bacteria to do their job. If they're not present, then that shows up on a stool test. Sometimes people go to a medical doctor and get a 1-day stool test, and that's fine for some things. I usually do a 3-day stool test to make sure there's no bad bugs in there, which can get missed if you only collect on 1 day. So send me your questions about that. If you have any questions, I'll try and talk about a patient that I've helped with some really amazing things that I've found in doing a stool test to identify bad bugs that you may have and not be aware of. Usually you can get rid of them with natural means. Sometimes you might have to take a short course of antibiotics or antivirals, but usually there are natural antimicrobial supplements that can use to resolve these things. So there are a number of interactions between estrogen and gut bacteria. Also, progesterone. So progesterone is a critical hormone for reproductive health, progesterone. Its levels are influenced by intestinal inflammation and microbiome diversity. As with everything else in the gut, it's critically important when we test this. This is always a big part of the results of the test to promote diversity and balance. You need lots of different kinds of bugs, and you need to have them in a particular range. So too much of the same bug is bad, as is too little. And chronic gut inflammation also elevates something called lipopolysaccharides. And these elevated levels of these lipopolysaccharides can trigger immune responses that lower progesterone. So this can contribute to irregular menstrual cycles and implantation failure and infertility. Progesterone also promotes the growth of bifidobacterium species. This is a broad category of beneficial bacteria. They're often bifidobacteria in good probiotics, and there are a number of species that you want to have in adequate amounts in your gut. So progesterone promotes the growth of some of these, an effect that is increasingly noticeable during the later stages of pregnancy. And gut bacteria also act to convert progesterone to something called allopregnolone. And this affects the brain and the nervous system. Low levels of allopregnolone can contribute to postpartum depression and mood and psychiatric disorders. So that's why naturally your progesterone stimulates the growth of these species that help prevent that. But if you have inadequate amounts of it, then you have an increased risk of those mood disorders during pregnancy. So a well-balanced gut microbiome supports optimal nutrient absorption, reducing inflammation, inflammatory responses, and promoting stability of your hormones. So just like with estrogen, it goes both ways. If you know somebody that's been having difficulty getting pregnant and carrying a pregnancy to term, or other pregnancy-related issues, postpartum depression. If you've had that, somebody's had, for example, has had a severe mood disorder after a previous pregnancy and they're getting pregnant again, it might be a good idea to test the gut to make sure that they have the support they need with these balanced bifidobacteria and other species to help lower the risk of those mood disorders that can complicate pregnancy. And if you're having an inflammatory gut condition that is not responding to other types of treatment, part of the problem may be progesterone levels, which we can test with a saliva hormone test. I'm Dr. Todd Binkley. You're listening to Safe, Effective, Natural Solutions to Almost Any Health Challenge. We're talking about the tremendous and increasingly better understood interactions between the gut microbiome and hormones. So testosterone also interacts with the gut. Testosterone is, of course, essential for muscle growth, metabolic function, mood regulation, and libido in men and women. And emerging research is suggesting that the gut microbiota, the gut bacteria, significantly impact testosterone levels through multiple mechanisms, including the regulation of inflammation and nutrient absorption. And dysbiosis, imbalance between the good bacteria and bad bacteria, and chronic gut inflammation that results from that can lead to increased oxidative stress, which negatively impacts testosterone synthesis. So elevated levels of testosterone in males and females are shown to correlate with a more diverse microbiota and quantity, higher quantities of certain specific beneficial species, and some bacterial strains such as Akkermansia municophila have been shown associated with healthier testosterone levels and metabolic function. Gut health also affects insulin sensitivity, which plays a key role in testosterone balance, particularly in conditions such as PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. And that one species, Akkermansia municophila, say that 3 times fast. This is a species of beneficial bacteria that's long been known to reduce inflammation and promote healthier balance between other species of good bacteria. And so its function and its importance has long been known, and more recently it is now available as a supplement. You can get Akkermansia municophila as a supplement and include that as one of your primary probiotics if necessary. So if you have a chronic inflammatory gut condition, we may need to test your testosterone levels. And if you have low libido, difficulty building up and maintaining muscle mass and regulating certain moods, then it may be because of a problem in your gut that's impairing testosterone production. Cortisol, adrenal function, or more specifically, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, for those who want the full technical version. Cortisol, adrenal, just if you hear people talking about adrenal fatigue, cortisol is the main hormone that we're testing to assess the function of this aspect of adrenals to deal with stress, the stress response. But it's actually governed by the hypothalamus and the pituitary, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Governing stress response is closely linked to the gut microbiome. So imbalances in the gut bacteria, dysbiosis in the gut, heightens the production of inflammatory cytokines. These were the things that caused the cytokine storm at the end of COVID, when people are dying and the inflammation just overwhelmed their systems. Dysbiosis can enhance this inflammatory cytokine, disrupting the HP axis dysfunction and leading to dysregulated cortisol levels. An imbalance in cortisol can also contribute to fatigue, weight gain, depression and anxiety, and metabolic dysfunction, difficulties maintaining weight and increasing risk of diabetes. Increases in cortisol levels affect the gut microbiome by altering gut transit time again, increasing intestinal permeability. So this is similar to the effects of estrogen we talked about a little while ago, and the availability of certain nutrients which are important to have balanced diversity of microbiome in your gut. So if you have adrenal fatigue, if you have a lot of stress, if you're wired and tired, if you suspect you have adrenal dysfunction, part of the problem may be in your gut. And if you're having a chronic gut condition and you're not getting the results you expect, part of that might be a problem of too much cortisol or too little, and that can be tested with a saliva hormone test. Well, here's a patient of mine, an example of the interactions between gut health and hormone levels. This is a 71-year-old female who came in complaining of brain fog and tearfulness, fluid retention and bloating, decreased mental sharpness, fatigue in the morning and the afternoon, decreased stamina, cold body temperature, incontinence, weight gain in the hips and waist, decreased flexibility and a burned out feeling, thin skin, and bone loss. So this is the things that she checked on her form when she came in, and we did the initial hormone test. Several of these are obviously hormone related, so we did her hormone test. Her results showed that she had low cortisol in the morning, low cortisol at noon, and the evening and at night it was fine. She also had low DHEA. What is that? And that sounds like DHA, not to be confused with the DHA, which is fish oil. DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone, is the steroid that's produced primarily in the adrenal glands, and it's a precursor for both testosterone and estrogen. It declines naturally with age. Low levels are linked to osteoporosis, adrenal insufficiency, and even heart disease and depression. And a lot of people have heard this and just rush out. You can buy DHEA in stores anywhere, and a lot of people think, I feel these things, so I'm going to take some DHEA. Don't do that. Don't take DHEA unless you get tested. And your tests show that DHEA is low. It's with hormones, with so many things, but especially with hormones, balance is critical. Too much is bad, too little is bad, and you have no idea if yours is too low unless you get tested. And if you take it, and sometimes the symptoms of too much and too little are the same. But hers was low, and her estrogen levels and all three of her estrogen levels. When I do a test, I test all. Most people have only heard of estradiol. That's the most famous of the estrogens, but estrone is important to test, and especially estriol. So estriol, E3, has similar functions and effects as estradiol, but it is unlike estradiol. Estriol is cancer protective. It actually reduces your risk of breast and ovarian cancer. And most people, when I test them, are low in estriol. Well, this patient, 71 years old, all three were fine. Her estrogen, all three estrogens, estrone, E1, estradiol, E2, and estriol, were all within the normal range. But her testosterone was off the charts low. The range in women, the reference interval for a saliva test is 6 to 49, and the lower detectable limit is below 6. So sure, hers was, it was really low. And DHEA, as we said, was also low. So guess what's going to happen if we give her DHEA? Well, it's going to improve her DHEA levels, and it's also going to improve her testosterone levels, because if you take DHEA and your estrogen is fine, then most of the time your body's going to use it to make testosterone. Now, anytime I do hormone testing on someone, I always tell them it's going to be at least 6 months most of the time before we're going to retest. Hormones change slowly, especially as you get older. Minimum of 6 months before we retest, expect to see some of the changes we're looking for, and oftentimes up to a year. And so it's also important to, follow up anytime there's a change in symptoms to modify dosages. So this woman's 71 years old. We retested a year later. But before we did that, her estrogen levels were fine. But she was having some other issues with bone density. She has osteoporosis, and she'd had another type of test that showed that her response with other things she was taking for osteoporosis was a little less than we would like. And estrogen helps promote healthy bone density. So we decided to add it's important to do the testing, but with hormones, you don't ever just treat the numbers. You go with the symptoms as well as the test. You need both. And so she had a condition that could very likely be benefited by adding a little bit of estrogen. So we did that. And then fast forward a year later, her brain fog, tearfulness, fluid retention and bloating, decreased mental sharpness, and morning and afternoon fatigue are all significantly better. She has more stamina. Her cold body temperature is improved, and incontinence is not an issue anymore. She hasn't lost the weight that she wants to lose yet, still has some issues with that. And as I mentioned, still has the issue with bone. Thinning skin is also improved somewhat, not perfect, but improved somewhat. But she still has osteoporosis. That's to be expected because it's really too early to see a change after a year. It can take 2 years to see a difference on the standard DEXA scan bone density test, for example, to see a change significant enough on whatever type of therapy. The medical therapies, they're usually just trying to give you drugs that don't and show up 2 years later and hope your test doesn't get any worse or only a little bit worse. They're not even hoping for it to be improved oftentimes. So because she was having that issue, we did decide to add some estrogen before retesting. And so she had all these symptom improvements. That was exciting. But she's also coming back now. And of course, we gave her some DHEA and some adrenal support, and her adrenal glands in the morning, her adrenal gland function is now perfect, right? It's dead center in the optimal range. Still a little bit of low cortisol at noon, in the middle of the day, and in the evening, and her symptoms. Even though her symptoms, that's an interesting thing too. So the symptoms don't always correlate with the numbers. That's why you have to use both. So we'll treat the numbers, but also with the symptoms. And if they disagree, we'll err on the side of the symptoms. So her midday cortisol was still low, but her energy was dramatically improved at noon. So her DHEA, we put her on some DHEA that's now back up into the optimal range. And that, as expected, has boosted her testosterone up to the high normal reference range for women with the increase in stamina that we expected to get from that. But we did give her a little of low-dose estradiol and estriol and progesterone to help with her bone density. Well, as with everything related to hormones, you have to keep testing. It's never going to be a one-and-done type of situation. You have to do a therapy test. Situations even can change. And so when we retested her now, even though it was a very low dose, her estradiol was a little bit too high, and her progesterone was really, really too high. So now we have to reduce that back again. It was nothing dangerous, but it's just, now we know that she needs to not take any of that. And I had her do some other things to better address the osteoporosis. We increased her collagen dose, had her do a different type of very light tapping, weight-bearing exercise to stimulate bone growth, and we'll have to wait a little while to retest that. But some of her symptoms that were better, but not quite as good as she'd like them to be, can be affected by dysbiosis, by disruptions in the normal bacteria and other beneficial species in the gut. For her evening fatigue, the weight gain wasn't quite where she wanted to be yet. The bone loss we talked about, still some thinning skin and muscle size flexibility. So we did a stool test. Hormones affect the gut. The gut affects hormone production. Hormone conditions can be helped by addressing gut issues. Gut issues can be affected by addressing hormones. We get her stool test results back, and it showed a little bit of a yeast infection that we needed to address and high beta-glucuronidase. So if you're just tuning in, we spoke about beta-glucuronidase earlier on this program and its effect on estrogen balance. So it modulates. There are several beneficial bacteria in the gut that modulate estrogen levels by producing beta-glucuronidase. And as with all of these things, too much is bad and too little is bad. So her beta-glucuronidase is high. And interestingly, beta-glucuronidase can be high. It is often caused by a high-fat, high-protein, low-fiber diet. Well, that's the Atkins diet. That's the price. It's good to eat a high-protein diet, and healthy fats are good, but you need fiber too in certain amounts and specific types, and that's why we do the test to find out exactly what you need. So hers was high, beta-glucuronidase high, and that alters hormone levels in ways that can cause fatigue and bloating, two symptoms that she's still having some issue with. Well, she is eating a high-protein, good fat diet, but she was also getting pretty adequate fiber. There are some specific types of insoluble fiber that feed the bacteria, prebiotics that feed the beneficial bacteria in her gut that she wasn't getting enough of. So we added that. And the takeaway is basically that she was getting good results from the hormone testing. We still have a little bit of work to do, but we found some things that were directly impacting her hormone levels in the bacteria in her gut. And so we gave her some things to support that, some beneficial prebiotic fibers to support the growth of the bacteria. A lot of people ask, I just need to take a different probiotic, right? Well, probiotics are useful, but it's often and almost always more important to feed the beneficial bacteria with antioxidants, polyphenols, and specific types of fiber that various beneficial bacteria need to grow and maintain a healthy balance. Once again, we are out of time. Where does the time go? Remember, the condition of your body is always more important than any disease you've been diagnosed with. Do something this weekend to become a little bit healthier than you were last weekend. Thank you for listening. I look forward to speaking with you again next Friday at 2 p.m.
You've been listening to Safe, Effective Natural Solutions with Dr. Todd Binkley. If you have a health question you want discussed on the show, email your health questions to Dr. Binkley at binkleyhealingcenter.com. Take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions for yourself and for your loved ones, because our health matters. Join him next Friday at 2 p.m. for Safe, Effective Natural Solutions here on 98.3 FM, The Word.